Accorda, sometimes when you're walking through the Irish countryside, or maybe you're looking at Google Maps, satellite images, and you look at the greenery and the open fields, particularly in rural areas, and in your mind's eye, it's all normal, correct, and it's the way it's always been. But then you might stumble across an old church, an abandoned ruin, or a graveyard, and all of a sudden, it doesn't seem so normal. There's a sense that there's a void there. Because, of course, if you come across a church, an abandoned one, or an abandoned graveyard, these are markers that there was once generations and indeed communities in that particular area. So you look around and the question comes to mind: where did everyone go? This question comes up again and again and again. Whole villages, whole settlements, whole communities, sometimes vanished, sometimes abandoned, and sometimes decayed over time. Some settlements swallowed wholly by the land and the landscape, so much that even their names don't exist on the map today. Accorda, obviously a lot of that has to do with Ungurtamore, what some people call the famine, the Great Hunger. But it doesn't tell the whole story of forced migration, forced economic migration, rural depopulation. It was a byproduct of what was happening, but it was also actual policy. Of course, on Courtaparteen, we're talking about the tragedy of over 1 million dead, 1 million emigrated, and more so. But sometimes we don't think about the changes that happened to the landscape as a result of that initially and then subsequently over time. Because for the most part, these changes are invisible to us now, except, of course, where they're not. Dotted around Ireland exist some forgotten, some vanished, some disappeared famine-era villages. Now, sometimes these places disappear or regress over time. There's no big bang, no moment when everything ceases to exist. But while villages, towns and settlements, communities and clachans, as they used to be called, disappeared into the ground or were covered over, some still exist today. In this episode of Corja, I want to bring you to Courtaparteen, or to give it its real name, Courtaparteen. You see, at Corja, I've always been fascinated about how towns and settlements and villages simply disappeared due to starvation, disease, or emigration. Where once there was a memory or a spirit or a song or chat or just simply a community living and existing, next thing whole communities, whole clachans are steamrolled into the ground to make way for large farms, literally cattle replacing people. Accorda, when I was researching Courtaparteen, I came across a fantastic article which described it as a garden of sleep. It's not my intention to disturb sleeping, but rather to awaken the memory of the community that once lived there. Accorda, in this episode, I want to go in search of Courtaparteen in old maps, old records, and even on the ground itself. Accorda, you're with Undercover Irish, it's Misha Olin. Together we're uncovering Ireland's hidden curriculum, the landscapes, the lore, the language, the ballads. Accorda, Araigling na Céile. It's time to go in search of Courtaparteen. And we're going to start with maps. Right, so Accorda, the first thing we're looking at is the map of the entire Ireland, and apologies for the geopolitical reference that was viewed on the top of the map, but that comes from Google Maps. And we come in on the south coast, oh yes, and we zoom in, we come in right on the south coast of County of Cork, and we're going to just to the north of Ciuntala, the head of the brine, Kinsale as it's known nowadays, Ciuntala, and just south of Sandy Cove. So, sorry, it's south of the town of Ciuntala, but you can see the old head was visible there, Ciuntala. And between Sandy Cove and the old head of Kinsale, we zoom in and we discover the ruins of a church. Ruins of a church very visible from space, from satellite. And lying around it, we see the remnants of a grave. You can notice there the strand on the right-hand side. And this is why the Irish name Courtaparteen actually means something here. You're talking about the court of the little port, basically Courtaparteen. And surrounded by that, or just to the south of that, what we see is thick forestry. And it says there, hidden famine village, Courtaparteen. So the next thing that I want to do is go to side-by-side map comparisons. So again, apologies for some of the geopolitical references there. But the website that we're using here has Great Britain written down. Obviously, that's from back when some of these maps were made. And on the right-hand side, I've got the satellite image of today, as it is right now, where you can see different fields, you can see the headlands, you can see the bay, the strand in the opening there into Kinsale, into Kintyla. And on the left-hand side, then I have visible an older map, where Courtaparteen, the anglicisation of Courtaparteen, is clearly obvious. So this map goes back to the early 1800s, late 17th, early 1800s. So this is the proof that this village, this settlement, has been there for a long time, pre-famine, in fact. And on the right-hand side there, I'm after putting up a map which corresponds roughly to the time of Ungurtamore, and you can see the settlement. You can see different buildings, the different houses, and you can see what looks like a slipway down to the strand. So this is a coastal community, as I've mentioned, and it's very likely that I had a very strong relationship with not just the area around it in terms of Kintyla and in terms of some other ports or other areas where ships would have landed, but a relationship with the sea itself in terms of trade and in terms of fisheries and that. Now what I'm looking for is a comparison, another comparison. So I'm zooming out here, and on this map, the church is clearly marked. So we have proof now that this particular settlement, which shows up on Google Maps, on the modern Google Maps, and the modern Google satellite, as a hidden famine village, we have proof that it has been there for a long time and predates the famine, essentially. The next question I have then is how long it's been in an abandoned state. And looking at more modern maps, which may not be actually as detailed, but the settlement is clearly viewable on some of these maps. So these go back to the 1940s, and on this map, the village, not just the church, which is still visible, the village is marked. That's not to say that all of the village is inhabited, but it hasn't been swallowed up fully just yet by the foliage, by nature. Basically, it hasn't been swallowed whole by nature, but it's an indication to us that the title of it, or the description of it as a hidden famine village, might not be fully or wholly accurate. What I mean by that is, from our research in the maps there, can we say it's a famine era village? Yes, we can. It predates the famine on Ungurtamore. I keep saying famine. Ungurtamore is a more accurate description. Great hunger, for something we might explore in a different podcast, on Ungurtamore, or on Drochail, the bad life. So we can say, yes, it's a Ungurtamore era village. It was there at the time of Ungurtamore. But from looking at the maps here, it's not the case that it was abandoned and left to rot immediately after Ungurtamore. It's likely that it was a more gradual decline than some of the clachans that simply vanished into thin air in that period of time. So hidden famine village is partially true, in the sense that it predates the famine and it would have been around at the time of the famine on Ungurtamore. However, from looking at the maps here, this particular village is marked and has not been overgrown, certainly right up to the 1940s. The next thing that I want to bring to your attention, Ekarja, is an old newspaper article which I find just very evocative and kind of paints a picture. So when we look at places like this, we're looking for some sort of a real life reference from someone who remembers the village or someone who sees or who has seen the village. And this comes from a newspaper article, and the title of it is Garden of Sleep. So it says, memory of a churchyard on coast near Kinsale. And the quotation runs as follows. In the course of a contribution to one of Dublin's daily newspapers last week, Mr. Lennox Robinson, the playwright, said, "It is pleasanter to recall a couple of tiny graveyards, which are airy and the winds that blow through them have a salty tang." And this part is highlighted or in bold. One is attached to a small old ruined church called Courtaparteen on the south coast between Sandy Cove and the old head of Kinsale. Its graveyard extends to the cliff edge, soil is clayey, and each winter a few more yards of it slips to the strand below. We children picnicked there every summer, for it was famous for its shells, particularly cowries, which we were very carefully collected for. Of course, they would pass for currency when we visited the South Sea Islands. My mother used to sing a song called The Garden of Sleep, and as a child, I was certain that its locale was Courtaparteen. On the grass of the cliff, at the edge of the steep, God planted a garden of sleep. And he goes on to say, but maybe after 50 years, Courtaparteen has completely slipped into the Atlantic, and who now sings that nice old song? A carda tá sé in am doing, dull I dro Court on 14. Carda, it's time for us to go out on the ground of Court on 14. Tarlum,